The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive bowl. Thousands of seats held representatives from across the galaxy. Each species had their own section with special air, gravity, and temperature controls. The humans sat in a small corner with only 12 seats. They were the newest members and got the worst spot. Ambassador Dongmin adjusted his simple black suit and looked around the hall. After 5 years on the council, he still felt like an outsider. The other species treated humans like children who needed constant watching. Today would be no different. Order, order. The speaker's voice boomed through the hall. Gexhaller was a Vorthok, 10 feet tall with gray skin and 4 arms. His species had led the council for 300 years. We gathered today to vote on Resolution 847X. Subin, Dongmin's aide, whispered the translation into her tablet. The resolution had many fancy words, but it meant one thing. The council wanted to control human expansion. They wanted to stop humans from building new colonies. They wanted to put watchers on human worlds. They said it was for everyone's safety. The humans are too unpredictable, said Chancellor Vexthul as he stood up. His purple robes shimmered as he moved. They make decisions based on emotions, not logic. They fight among themselves constantly. How can we trust them with advanced technology? Murmurs of agreement came from around the hall. The crystalline Nethri delegates chimed like bells. Their speaker, Humtar, projected thoughts into the translation system. Humans lack the mental discipline for space travel. They should remain on their birth world until they evolve further. Dongmin felt his jaw tighten. 5 years of this. 5 years of being told humans were too violent, too stupid, too emotional. He thought about his daughter back on Earth. She was studying to be a doctor. The council would call that emotional thinking instead of logical career planning. The Belthari Mining Guild supports this resolution, rumbled Guildmaster Corthan. His rocky skin scraped against itself as he moved. Humans work too fast. They take shortcuts. They make other species look bad. More agreements echoed through the hall. The fish-like Aquari delegation bubbled their approval. The energy beings called Luminos flickered in patterns that meant yes. Species after species stood up to support the resolution. Taiho, the senior human diplomat, watched from the visitor gallery. He had gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 30 years trying to get humans into the council. Now he saw it was all pointless. The other species would never see humans as equals. Do the humans wish to speak? Asked Speaker Gexhaller. His tone suggested he hoped they would just stay quiet. Dongmin stood up slowly. The hall fell silent. Thousands of alien eyes turned toward the small human section. We do. He walked to the center podium. His footsteps echoed in the huge space. When he reached the microphone, he looked around the hall one more time. So many different species, so many worlds, and none of them wanted humans as true partners. 5 years ago, Earth received an invitation to join this council. Dongmin began. His voice was calm and steady. We were told this was a community of equals. We were told that all species had value. We believed those words. He paused and pulled out a small device. It was a standard human tablet, nothing fancy. In these 5 years, humans have contributed much to this council. We shared our medical knowledge freely. Human doctors have saved millions of lives across dozens of worlds. We shared our engineering skills. Human-built systems run power plants, water treatment facilities, and communication networks on over 200 council worlds. The hall remained silent. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. We shared our agricultural methods. Human farming techniques have ended food shortages on 17 worlds. We shared our conflict resolution methods. Human mediators have prevented 43 wars between council members. Dongmin looked directly at Chancellor Vexthul. And how have we been repaid for these contributions? With suspicion, with restrictions, with constant questioning of our right to exist as equals. The humans are emotional, Vexthul said loudly. This speech proves it. Logic says that primitive species need guidance. Dongmin smiled sadly. You call us primitive, yet your ships use human-designed navigation systems. Your worlds depend on human-built infrastructure. Your people live longer because of human medical advances. Tell me, Chancellor, which of us is truly primitive? The Vorthok delegates' forearms waved angrily. We allowed humans to help as a courtesy, to teach them proper methods. A courtesy, Dongmin repeated. He looked around the hall again. Today you vote to restrict human expansion, to place observers on our worlds, to treat us as children who cannot be trusted. This is not partnership. This is not equality. This is supervision. Subin was typing rapidly on her tablet. The withdrawal documents were already prepared. They had hoped it would not come to this, but they were ready. Let us vote, Speaker Gexhaller announced. All in favor of Resolution 847X? Lights began appearing across the hall. Green lights meant yes. Red lights meant no. The counting system was automatic and instant. Green lights appeared everywhere. The Vorthax voted yes. The Nethri voted yes. The Belthari voted yes. Species after species voted to restrict humanity. The final count appeared on the main screen. 847 votes for the resolution. Only one vote against it. The humans had voted alone. Dongmin walked back to the podium. The hall was buzzing with satisfaction. The alien delegates seemed pleased with themselves. They had put the troublesome humans in their place. The resolution passes, Speaker Gexhaller announced. Humans will now be subject to council oversight and expansion restrictions. Dongmin reached the podium and activated the microphone one final time. No, he said simply. The hall fell silent again. Excuse me? The speaker asked. I said no, Dongmin repeated. Humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Council. Effective immediately. We came seeking partnership. We found prejudice. We offered cooperation. We received condescension. This ends now. Subin pressed a button on her tablet. Across the galaxy, every human colony, ship, and station received the same message at the same moment. The withdrawal order was final and complete. All human personnel will depart council space within 72 hours. Dongmin continued. All human assistance, cooperation, and support ends now. All human-maintained systems will be transferred to local control immediately. We wish you the best of luck. The hall erupted in chaos. Delegates were shouting in dozens of languages. The translation system could not keep up with all the different voices. Speaker Gexhaller was banging his gavel, trying to restore order. Dongmin walked out of the hall with Subin behind him. Neither of them looked back. Behind them, the Galactic Council was learning what it meant to stand alone. 30 days had passed since the humans left the Council. At first, most alien species thought it would be easy to replace them. Humans were primitive, after all. How hard could their jobs be? On the mining world Kepler 442b, the answer was becoming clear. Very hard. Chief Engineer Hyun-Soo had managed the atmospheric processors for 3 years. The machines turned the planet's toxic air into something the Belthari miners could breathe. They were complex systems with thousands of moving parts. When Hyun-Soo left with the other humans, he handed over thick instruction manuals to his replacement. Guild Engineer Morthen was confident he could handle the job. He was Belthari, after all. His people had been mining asteroids when humans were still living in caves. How difficult could atmosphere processing be? The first processor shut down on day 12. Morthen checked the manual. It said to replace filter array 7A when pressure dropped below normal. He found filter array 7A and replaced it. The processor stayed off. He called the second Belthari engineer Vorkel for help. Together they studied the manual for hours. The writing was clear, but something was missing. The manual told them what to do, but not why to do it. It did not explain how the different systems worked together. By day 20, 6 more processors had failed. The air in the mining tunnels was getting bad. Belthari workers were getting sick. Some had to stop working completely. Morthen sent a message to the Belthari homeworld asking for help. The reply came back quickly. Figure it out yourself. The guild could not admit they needed human help after voting to restrict human expansion. On day 30, the last processor failed. The mining operation stopped completely. 3,000 Belthari miners had to leave the planet. The mine that had produced rare metals for 50 years was now empty. Similar problems were happening across the galaxy. In the Centauri system, Captain Jiwoo of the independent freighter New Horizon watched from outside council space as massive cargo ships drifted helplessly between planets. The hyperspace beacon network was failing. For 15 years, human technicians had maintained the quantum beacons that helped ships navigate through hyperspace. The work looked simple from the outside. Check some readings, replace some parts, make sure the quantum field stayed stable. But hyperspace was not simple. It was the space between normal space where the laws of physics worked differently. One small mistake could send a ship thousands of light years off course. Or worse, it could tear the ship apart. The aliens had never bothered to learn how the beacons really worked. They just knew that when the green light was on, hyperspace travel was safe. When it was red, they had to wait. The humans had made it look easy. Now the beacons were shutting down one by one. Ships that tried to jump without beacon guidance were disappearing. Some reappeared days later in random systems with confused crews. Others were never seen again. Captain Jiwoo received dozens of distress calls from stranded vessels. She wanted to help, but her ship was small. She could only rescue a few people at a time. Most of the stranded ships had crews of hundreds. The worst crisis was happening on Verdania, the agricultural world that fed half the galaxy. The planet grew enough food for 20 billion people across 40 different worlds, but the crops were dying. Keeper of Growth Zythara stood in his dying fields and tried to understand what was happening. The plants had been growing perfectly for years. They were modified versions of Earth crops that grew faster and bigger than normal. Human scientists had created them to help feed the galaxy, but now the leaves were turning yellow. The grain heads were shrinking. The root vegetables were rotting in the ground. Zythara had tried everything he could think of. More water, less water, different soil treatments. Nothing worked. What he did not know was that the crops needed special nutrients that came from Earth. The human agricultural team had been shipping these supplements to Verdania every month. The supplements looked like ordinary fertilizer, but they contained complex molecules that the modified plants could not live without. Minho was the only human who had stayed on Verdania. He was married to a Verdanian woman and had children who were half human. He loved his adopted world and did not want to leave. But now he was the only person who understood why the crops were failing. Zythara found Minho working in his small private garden. The humans' vegetables were green and healthy while everything else was dying. "Please," Zythara said. "You must help us. Billions of people will starve if the crops fail." Minho looked up from his tomatoes. They were Earth tomatoes, not the modified versions. They grew slower, but they did not need the special supplements. "I want to help," he said. "But I cannot." "Why not?" "You clearly know how to make plants grow." Minho pointed to the sky. A council security ship was landing at the spaceport. "Because they are coming to force me to help, and I will not be forced." The security team arrived an hour later. They were Althari, tall and pale with silver eyes. They considered themselves the most intelligent species in the galaxy. The team leader, Commander Kethevos, spoke to Minho like he was a child. "You will provide the agricultural data needed to save the crops," Kethevos announced. "This is not a request," Minho smiled sadly. "I cannot do that, cannot or will not." "Both." Minho pulled a small device from his pocket. It looked like a simple communicator, but it was connected to the planetary agricultural network. "This is a dead man's switch. If I do not enter a code every 24 hours, it will erase all human agricultural data from your computers." Kethevos stepped forward. "That would be an act of terrorism." "No," Minho said. "That would be preventing theft. The data belongs to humanity. We created it. We shared it freely when we were partners, but we are not partners anymore." The Althari commander reached for his weapon. Minho did not move. "Shoot me if you want," the human said. "But remember that someone has to enter the code in 23 hours and 57 minutes. "Only I know what it is." Kethevos stopped. He could not risk losing the data. Too many people depended on Verdanian food, but he also could not let a human defy council authority. While he hesitated, Minho pressed a button on the device. The agricultural computers across the planet began displaying the same message. Data purge initiated. Human agricultural database will be deleted in 72 hours unless authorization is received from Earth. "You have 3 days to contact Earth and ask for help," Minho said. "But remember, they voted to leave the council. They might not want to talk to you." The first formal request for assistance reached Earth on day 32. It came from the Verdanian government, asking for emergency agricultural aid. The message was polite but desperate. Billions of people would starve without human help. The reply came back within hours. It was signed by the new Earth Council. Request denied. Verdania voted to restrict human expansion. You made your choice. Live with it. Similar requests were flooding in from across the galaxy. The Belthari Guild wanted help with their mining equipment. The Hyperspace Navigation Authority needed technicians to fix the beacon network. The Nexari Collective was having problems with their quantum communications. All the requests received the same reply. Request denied. The aliens were starting to understand something they had never realized before. The humans had not just been working for the Council, they had been holding the galaxy together. On Earth, Ambassador Dongmin read the daily reports of system failures across Council space. He felt no satisfaction in their problems, but he felt no sympathy either. The galaxy had made its choice. Now it would learn what that choice meant. Subin knocked on his office door. "Sir, we have received an interesting offer." "From who?" "The Kithra refugees. They want to join our alliance." Dongmin smiled for the first time in weeks. The Kithra were a species the Council had abandoned when their world was destroyed by corporate mining. They had been living on refugee ships for years, ignored by the great powers of the galaxy. "Send word that they are welcome," he said. "It is time to build something better." 6 months had passed since humanity left the Council. The problems were getting worse every day. What had started as small equipment failures was now threatening entire civilizations. Dr. Hyejin sat in her laboratory on New Sol, the first major human colony built outside Council space. She was documenting the collapse of galactic civilization. Her job was to record everything that happened. Future generations needed to understand why the galaxy fell apart. Her computer showed reports from across Council space. The news was bad everywhere. The Nexari collective was facing the worst crisis in their history. The Nexari were a hive mind species. Billions of individual Nexari shared thoughts through quantum communication networks. They could think together as one massive brain. This made them incredibly smart and efficient. But it also made them completely dependent on their communication system. For 20 years, the quantum networks had worked perfectly. The Nexari gave credit to their own technology. What they did not know was that human engineers had designed the error correction algorithms that kept the network stable. Quantum communication was fast, but fragile. Random interference could scramble messages or create false signals. The human algorithms constantly checked for errors and fixed them automatically. Without these corrections, the quantum network slowly degraded. At first, the problems were small. Messages took a few extra seconds to transmit. Some communications had minor errors that required resending. The Nexari noticed but were not worried. They thought it was just normal system aging. But quantum networks did not age gracefully. Small errors created bigger errors. Bigger errors created system crashes. System crashes created communication gaps. Communication gaps broke the hive mind connection. Individual Nexari who lost connection with the collective became confused and frightened. They had never learned to think alone. Some sat motionless, waiting for the collective voice to return. Others panicked and ran around aimlessly. A few tried to reconnect by overloading the remaining communication nodes, which made the problems worse. Queen Mind Nethasara was one of the few Nexari who could think independently. She had been trained to lead during emergencies when the collective might be damaged. Now she faced the worst emergency in Nexari history. The communication lag between Nexari worlds had grown from milliseconds to hours. The collective was breaking apart. Entire planets were going silent. Some Nexari worlds were trying to fix the problem by building their own networks, but they did not understand the human algorithms. Their attempts only created more interference. Nethasara sent a desperate message to Earth. She offered to trade anything for human technical assistance. Advanced Nexari science, territorial concessions, even Nexari colony worlds. The reply came back quickly. The Nexari collective voted to restrict human expansion. Request denied. Industrial worlds across the galaxy were having similar problems. Automated factories that had run perfectly for decades were breaking down. The aliens had been so impressed by human efficiency that they had copied human designs without understanding how they worked. On the manufacturing world, Kalos Prime, factory after factory was shutting down. Sungmin, the former chief systems engineer, watched the news from his new home on the colony world Haven. He remembered installing those systems himself. The Kalos Manufacturing Consortium had hired human engineers to modernize their factories. The old alien systems were slow and inefficient. The humans had designed new automated systems that tripled production while using half the power. But the human systems were complex. They used artificial intelligence to optimize production in real time. They adjusted schedules, power usage, and material flow based on thousands of variables. The AI made millions of small decisions every day to keep everything running smoothly. The aliens had been amazed by the results. They copied the human designs and installed them across hundreds of worlds. They thought they were getting advanced technology for free. What they did not realize was that the AI systems needed constant updates and maintenance. Human technicians had provided this maintenance remotely. They updated the software, fixed bugs, and adjusted parameters as conditions changed. The work was invisible to the aliens, who only saw the final results. When the humans left, the maintenance stopped. The AI system slowly became outdated. They started making bad decisions based on old information. Production schedules became chaotic. Power systems overloaded. Material flows created bottlenecks and waste. The factory owners tried to fix the problems themselves. They hired their own technicians and bought new computers. But they could not recreate the human AI algorithms. The systems were too advanced and too complex. Within 6 months, industrial production across the galaxy had dropped by 60%. Worlds that had depended on manufactured goods were facing shortages of everything from medical equipment to basic tools. The military situation was even worse. Defense networks that had protected worlds for decades were failing catastrophically. The Althari war fleet, once the most powerful military force in the galaxy, was learning just how dependent they had become on human technology. Admiral Kethmoran stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at blank sensor screens. The ship's sensors had been upgraded with human technology 5 years ago. The improvements had been incredible. Detection range increased by 400%. Target resolution improved by 300%. The Althari had felt invincible. Now the sensors showed nothing but static. The human-designed quantum sensor arrays were failing one by one. Kethmoran's ships were flying blind through space that was known to contain pirate fleets and hostile forces. "Admiral," reported Navigation Officer Thexval, "3 more ships have lost sensor contact. They are requesting permission to return to base." Kethmoran wanted to say yes. Blind ships were sitting targets. But if he sent ships home every time they lost sensors, he would have no fleet left. Denied. They will maintain formation and rely on passive sensors. Passive sensors were the old Althari technology. They could detect large objects at close range, but they missed small ships and long-distance threats. It was like trying to fight with one eye closed. An alarm sounded. "Admiral, we are receiving a distress call from the mining platform Zeta 7. They report unknown ships approaching their position." "How many ships?" Kethmoran asked. "Unknown, sir. The platform's sensors are also down. They can only see what their telescopes can detect." Kethmoran felt frustrated and helpless. The unknown ships could be anything from harmless traders to dangerous pirates. Without proper sensors, there was no way to tell until it was too late. "Set course for Zeta 7, maximum speed." The flagship and its escort ships jumped to hyperspace. The old navigation systems worked, but they were slow and inefficient compared to human-designed equipment. The journey that should have taken 2 hours took 6 hours. When they arrived, Zeta 7 was gone. The mining platform had been destroyed. Debris floated in space where it used to be. There was no sign of the attacking ships. "Search for survivors," Kethmoran ordered, but he knew it was probably too late. Without modern sensors and fast navigation, the Althari fleet was always arriving after the disasters had already happened. Similar attacks were happening across the galaxy. Pirates and hostile forces had quickly realized that the great military fleets were now nearly helpless. Worlds that had been safe for generations were suddenly vulnerable. The Council held emergency sessions every day. Representatives from hundreds of species demanded action. They wanted solutions to the cascading failures. They wanted their technology fixed. They wanted their security restored. But the Council had no solutions to offer. They had expelled the only species that understood how to fix the problems. The remaining species could build impressive monuments and create beautiful art. But they could not maintain the complex systems that kept galactic civilization running. Chancellor Vexthul stood before the assembly and tried to maintain order. The Great Hall was in chaos. Representatives were shouting at each other in dozens of languages. Some were demanding war against humanity. Others were calling for immediate surrender and begging for human help. "The humans were only one species among many," Vexthul said loudly. "We do not need them. We can solve these problems ourselves." But his words sounded hollow. Every day brought news of new failures and new disasters. The galaxy was falling apart and everyone knew why. Dr. Hai Jin finished her daily report and sent it to the human archive ships. The record would be complete. Future historians would understand exactly how and why the Galactic Council destroyed itself. She looked out the window of her laboratory at the growing city of New Sol. Human colonists were building something new here, something better. They had learned from the Council's mistakes. The galaxy was changing. The old order was dying. But from its ashes, something better might be born. 1 year had passed since humanity left the Council. The galaxy was in chaos. Entire civilizations were collapsing. The proud species that had voted to restrict human expansion were now desperate for human help. The first to break was the Vorthak hegemony. Chancellor Vex Thule, who had led the vote against humanity, now found himself preparing for the most humiliating mission of his life. He was going to beg the humans to return. Boram was the civilian administrator of New Sol, the largest human colony outside former council space. She was a quiet woman who preferred managing supply schedules to grand politics. But today she was about to receive the most powerful political leader in the galaxy. The Vorthak delegation arrived in a massive ceremonial ship. It was 10 times larger than necessary, covered in gold and precious metals. The ship itself was worth more than most planets' annual budgets. This was meant to impress the humans and show Vorthak wealth and power. Boram met them at the spaceport with a simple shuttle and a cup of coffee. She wore a plain blue jumpsuit and work boots. The contrast was intentional. The humans were done being impressed by alien displays of wealth. Chancellor Vex Thule, Boram said politely as the massive alien emerged from his ship. "Welcome to New Sol. I hope your journey was comfortable." Vex Thule's forearms carried elaborate gifts. Rare crystals, ancient art, and precious metals worth billions of credits. He had practiced this speech for weeks. Administrator Boram, I come bearing symbols of friendship and regret. The Vorthak hegemony wishes to apologize for our past misunderstandings. Boram accepted the gifts with a smile. Thank you. These will look lovely in our children's museum. The kids will enjoy the pretty colors. The Chancellor's face darkened. These were priceless artifacts, not toys for children. But he forced himself to remain calm. He needed human help too desperately to be offended. We come to offer humanity full membership in a new galactic organization, he continued. The Vorthaks would be honored to serve as your partners in rebuilding galactic civilization. That's very kind, Boram said. But we're not interested in galactic politics anymore. We're too busy helping our friends. Friends? Boram gestured toward the city. In the distance, construction crews were building new districts. But these were not human workers. The crews included Cathera refugees, independent traders from dozens of minor species, and exiles from council worlds who had refused to support anti-human policies. We call it the Free Worlds Alliance, Boram explained. Anyone who believes in cooperation instead of domination is welcome to join. We're building something new. Vex Thule felt panic rising in his chest. But the galaxy needs proper leadership. The Vorthaks have ruled for centuries. We know how to maintain order. Your order is collapsing, Boram said gently. We've seen the reports. Mining worlds abandoned, communication networks failing, defense systems crashing. How is that working out for you? The Chancellor had no answer. The Vorthak hegemony was indeed falling apart. Without human-maintained systems, their vast empire was becoming unmanageable. Whole sectors were going dark. Rebellions were breaking out on worlds that had been peaceful for generations. While the Council remnants struggled with collapse, the Free Worlds Alliance was thriving. The difference was visible everywhere on New Sol. Different species worked together on equal terms. No one was considered superior or inferior. No one was told their culture was primitive or their ideas were worthless. Jae-sung, a former council mediator, now coordinated Alliance diplomatic efforts. He had spent years trying to make the council work fairly. Now he was helping build something that actually did work. His latest project was the Cathera integration program. The Cathera were a species the council had written off as unimportant. Their homeworld had been strip-mined by council corporations until it became uninhabitable. The survivors had been living on refugee ships for decades. The Alliance had welcomed them with open arms. More importantly, the Alliance had listened to their ideas. The Cathera had developed incredible biotechnology during their years of exile. They could grow living buildings, create organic computers, and design plants that cleaned polluted environments. The Cathera agricultural systems are ready for testing, Jae-sung reported to the Alliance Council. Unlike the old Galactic Council, this was a small group that met in a simple conference room. No massive halls or ceremonial displays. Just practical people solving practical problems. Excellent, said Council Member Yuki, the elected representative from the Japanese colonies. How many worlds want to participate in the pilot program? 47 so far, including 3 former Council worlds that are desperate to restore their food production. The irony was not lost on anyone. The Council had called Cathara technology primitive. Now former Council worlds were begging to use that same technology to save themselves from starvation. Meanwhile, the remaining Council species were trying to reverse engineer human technology with disastrous results. The Nethri had attempted to rebuild human-designed communication systems using their crystal technology. The result was a cascade failure that destroyed 3 entire colony clusters. The Belthari tried to modify human mining equipment to work with their own power systems. The modification caused massive explosions that killed hundreds of workers and destroyed billions of credits worth of equipment. Each failure made the crisis worse. Each disaster created more refugees who fled to Alliance space seeking help. And each refugee brought new knowledge and skills that made the Alliance stronger. Captain Lee commanded the Alliance Defense Force ship Perseverance. She was patrolling the border between Alliance and Council space when her sensors detected a large fleet approaching. The ships were Althari, probably the most advanced military force the Council had left. Red alert, Lee announced. All hands to battle stations. Prepare for possible engagement. The Althari fleet was impressive even in its weakened state. 50 warships in perfect formation, their silver hulls gleaming in the starlight. Admiral Kethmaran commanded the fleet from his flagship. He was convinced that a show of force would make the Alliance surrender and agree to new negotiations. Alliance vessel, this is Admiral Kethmaran of the Althari Warfleet. You are ordered to stand down and prepare to be boarded. Captain Lee smiled. The Althari were still thinking like the old Council. They believed that superior technology and intimidating displays would automatically make others submit. They had learned nothing from their recent failures. Admiral Kethmaran, this is Captain Lee of the Free Worlds Alliance. You are in Alliance space without permission. Please state your intentions. We demand the immediate return of human technical personnel to restore critical systems across Council space. Failure to comply will result in military action. Lee looked at her tactical display. The Althari ships were powerful, but they were also predictable. The Alliance had been studying Council military tactics for months. They knew exactly what the Althari would do. Admiral, I'm afraid that's not possible. All human personnel are here voluntarily. We don't force people to do anything against their will. Then you have chosen war, Kethmaran announced. Attack formation. Prepare to fire. The Althari ships moved into their traditional attack pattern. It was the same formation they had used for 200 years. Elegant, efficient, and completely familiar to anyone who had studied their tactics. Lee waited until the last possible moment. All ships execute Plan Gamma. The Alliance fleet had been hiding behind a nearby asteroid field. The ships were smaller than the Althari vessels, but they were faster and more flexible. They had also been designed with one crucial advantage. They were unpredictable. Instead of meeting the Althari fleet head-on, the Alliance ships scattered in all directions. Some attacked from above, others from below. A few came from the sides while others hung back to provide support. It was controlled chaos that the rigid Althari formations could not handle. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, most of the Althari fleet was disabled or destroyed. The survivors limped back to Council space with their pride shattered and their faith in Council superiority broken. News of the defeat spread quickly. The mighty Althari Warfleet, terror of the galaxy for centuries, had been crushed by a collection of refugees and outcasts. The message was clear. The old order was finished. In the Council chambers, emergency sessions were becoming daily events. Representatives demanded action, but no one had any good ideas. Some wanted to surrender and beg for mercy. Others wanted to fight to the bitter end. Most just wanted someone else to solve their problems. Chancellor Vexthul stood before the assembly one more time. His proud bearing was gone. His fancy robes were wrinkled and stained. The weight of galactic collapse was crushing him. Fellow beings, he said quietly, we must face the truth. The humans were not primitive. They were not inferior. We destroyed the greatest partnership in galactic history because of our own arrogance and prejudice. The hall fell silent. For the first time in centuries, a council leader was admitting that they had been wrong. I propose that we formally dissolve the Galactic Council and petition the Free Worlds Alliance for mercy. The vote was unanimous. 3 years had passed since humanity left the Galactic Council. The galaxy was completely transformed. The old council had dissolved into smaller regional governments struggling to survive. Meanwhile, the Free Worlds Alliance had grown into the largest interstellar organization in galactic history. Dayun stood at the podium in the Alliance Assembly Hall on New Geneva Station. She had been elected as the first chancellor of the Free Worlds Alliance 6 months ago. Unlike the old council chambers, this hall was modest in size and comfortable for all species. No one sat in positions of honor or shame. Everyone was equal. Today marks the 3rd anniversary of humanity's departure from the Galactic Council, Dayun said to the assembled representatives. It also marks the day we officially welcome our 200th member species. Applause filled the hall. The newest members were the Zephyrian Trade Federation, a group of merchant species that had been ignored by the old council. They brought with them advanced commerce networks and peaceful trading traditions. The transformation had been remarkable. Species that had barely been acknowledged by the council were now thriving members of the alliance. The Cathera had become master terraformers, turning dead worlds into garden paradises. The Rimworld Collective had contributed advanced asteroid mining techniques that were safer and more efficient than anything the Belthari had ever developed. Most surprising of all, many former council species had applied to join the alliance, not as rulers or senior partners, but as equals seeking cooperation instead of domination. Ambassador Wu Jin maintained diplomatic contact with the council remnants from his office on Harmony Station. His job was to monitor the former council territories and assist any species that wanted to join the alliance. It was delicate work, since many proud species still struggled with the idea of equality. The Vorthak hegemony has submitted another application for alliance membership, Wu Jin reported to the weekly diplomatic briefing. This is their 5th attempt. What's the problem this time? Asked diplomatic coordinator Min Seo. Same as always. They want guaranteed leadership positions and special status as a senior species. They can't accept that membership means equality. The Vorthaks were struggling more than most former council species. Their empire had been built on the idea that they were naturally superior to other species. When that superiority was proven false, their society had no other foundation to stand on. Rebellions and civil wars were tearing their territory apart. Other species were adapting better. The Nethri had learned to value diversity over conformity. Their crystal networks now incorporated technology from dozens of different species, making them more robust and creative than ever before. The Belthari had abandoned their corporate hierarchies and formed worker cooperatives that were both more efficient and more fair. The alliance had succeeded by doing exactly what the council had refused to do, treating all species as equals with valuable contributions to make. There were no primitive cultures or advanced civilizations. There were only different approaches to solving problems. On the industrial world of New Harmony, Sungmin watched automated factories running at full capacity. These were not the rigid systems he had built for the old Callus Consortium. These were collaborative designs created by teams of engineers from 20 different species. Human creativity, Cathera bioengineering, Nethri quantum processing, and Zephyrian efficiency protocols all worked together. The result was manufacturing systems that were not only more productive than the old council factories, but also more adaptable and sustainable. Production is up 30% from last quarter, reported factory supervisor Telandros, a former Belthari Guild engineer. The new organic components from the Cathera are performing even better than predicted. Sungmin smiled as he watched workers from different species collaborating on the assembly lines. No one was giving orders based on species superiority. Everyone contributed their expertise and learned from others. It was the partnership the council had claimed to offer but never delivered. The military situation had also stabilized, though in ways the old council would have found impossible to understand. The Alliance Defense Force was built on cooperation, rather than domination. Instead of one species' ships with another species' weapons, the ADF used integrated designs created by joint engineering teams. Captain Lee's ship, the Perseverance, was typical of Alliance military thinking. The hull was built using Rimworld metallurgy techniques. The engines used Nethri quantum principles. The sensors combined human innovation with Zephyrian precision. The weapons were based on Cathera biotechnology that disabled rather than destroyed enemy ships. The ship was a physical symbol of Alliance values. Different strengths working together to create something better than any one species could build alone. "Captain," reported Communications Officer Tai Jun. "We're receiving a distress call from the Epsilon sector. Pirate raids are attacking civilian shipping. Set course for Epsilon," Lee ordered, "and send word to the local Alliance members. Let's see if they want to help protect their own shipping lanes." The response was immediate. Ships from 6 different species volunteered to join the mission. The pirates would face not just one Alliance ship, but a multi-species task force working together. It was exactly the kind of cooperation that made piracy increasingly difficult in Alliance space. Meanwhile, in what remained of Council space, the situation continued to deteriorate. The Althari Empire had fragmented into dozens of competing factions. Each faction claimed to be the true heir to Althari greatness, but none could maintain the complex systems needed for interstellar civilization. Some Althari groups had tried to rebuild their empire through conquest. They attacked weaker neighbors and seized their resources. But these victories were temporary. Without the knowledge to maintain captured technology, the conquered worlds quickly became worthless. Other Althari factions had taken a different approach. They swallowed their pride and applied for Alliance membership. These applications were always approved, but the adjustment was difficult for a species raised to believe in their own superiority. Colonel Keth Andon was one Althari officer who had made the transition successfully. He now served in the Alliance Defense Force alongside former enemies and species his people had once considered inferior. It had been humbling but also educational. "I spent my whole life believing Althari were the galaxy's natural leaders," he told his mixed-species crew during a training exercise. "I was wrong. Leadership isn't about genetic superiority or ancient glory. It's about bringing out the best in everyone around you." His crew included humans, Kithara, reformed Belthari, and even a few Vorthax who had abandoned their empire's failing ideology. They worked together better than any pure species unit he had ever commanded. The old council's greatest fear had been that humans were too chaotic and unpredictable for galactic civilization. The Alliance proved that chaos and unpredictability were actually strengths. When problems arose, Alliance species found creative solutions by combining different approaches. The rigid thinking that had dominated the council was gone. Educational exchanges were common throughout Alliance space. Students from every member species could study anywhere they wanted. Universities that had once been restricted to single species now hosted diverse student bodies that learned from each other's perspectives. On the research station Deep Thought, Dr. Haijin worked alongside colleagues from 30 different species. They were developing new terraforming techniques that combined the best ideas from across the galaxy. The project would have been impossible under the Council, where species rarely shared their most advanced knowledge. "The preliminary results are excellent," reported Research Coordinator Yoon Seo. "The combined biotech and quantum engineering approach is 50% more efficient than anything we've tried before." "Any problems with species compatibility?" Hijin asked. "None at all. In fact, the diversity of perspectives is helping us solve problems faster. When one approach doesn't work, someone always has a different idea to try." It was exactly what the Alliance had been built to achieve. Different species working together as equals to accomplish things none of them could do alone. In the Alliance capital of New Geneva, Chancellor Daun prepared for her evening address to the galaxy. It was a tradition she had started, a simple broadcast that anyone could watch. Unlike the grand pronouncements of council leaders, these talks were conversational and honest. 3 years ago, humanity was told we were too primitive for galactic civilization, she said to the camera. Too emotional, too unpredictable, too dangerous. The council voted to restrict our growth and place us under supervision. She paused and looked out the window at the bustling space station. Ships from hundreds of worlds moved through the traffic patterns in perfect harmony. No one species controlled the others. Everyone contributed to the shared success. Today, we live in a galaxy where over 200 species work together as equals, where diversity is valued instead of feared, where cooperation replaces domination. The Council was wrong about humans, but more importantly, they were wrong about what makes civilization strong. The broadcast was watched across Alliance space and in the struggling remnants of Council territory. For Alliance citizens, it was a reminder of how far they had come.